Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to the next session. It's Megan Shamus again with the FIDO Alliance. I know you've been seeing me a lot today. I'm thrilled to be here for a talk with Yash Padodia, the Principal Product Manager Tech Worldwide Consumer at Amazon. So I know you've heard a lot of sessions today around FIDO. We've talked about passkeys. There was a 101. We've talked about some of the opportunities that FIDO presents to provide consumers with phishing-resistant sign-ins with minimal friction, but that's a great sort of evolution of authentication. But with FIDO put aside, I do wonder a lot, like, what do these large providers grapple with when it comes to authenticating sometimes upwards of 1 billion consumer user? I wonder that every time I transact online, and I have to do multiple steps sometimes to do that. And I'm sure it's surprising to hear that I do shop online sometimes, but I do. So you may be wondering that too, just sort of what are the considerations that a company like Amazon has to look at in order to really roll out any kind of authentication. So really the overarching topic of authenticating users and the challenges there and perhaps opportunities there is what I'm really looking forward to talking with Yash here today. So welcome, Yash. Please do introduce yourself and tell us about your role at Amazon.
Hey, thanks, Megan. Super excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me and Amazon to be a part of this panel. Hey, everyone. I'm Yash. I own authentication for worldwide customers at Amazon. Prior to joining Amazon, I was an entrepreneur, built and sold my own startup. Before that, I was a coder. I started coding at the age of 14, wrote a bunch of programs on C++, basics. Those were the days we started with. And today I am a principal product manager at Amazon, and I own authentication for worldwide customers. Looking forward to this, Megan.
Yeah, looking forward to it too. And I'm glad you mentioned that because we could talk after, because my 8-year-old is going to start coding camp soon. So we can talk about how all that goes when you're a child. So I want to start out with just sort of the fundamental question, which is, looking at everybody's, favorite or not so favorite authentication method, which is passwords. We talk so much about moving beyond passwords, like it's table stakes that, every company really has the tools to do that when maybe it's not the case. So I was hoping maybe you could talk to me a little bit about how Amazon looks at or maybe has dealt with authentication and passwords from usability and security perspectives, and kind of how do you think about that?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question, Megan. Talking about a childhood, let's start with my childhood a bit. Growing up when I was a kid, one of my favorite things to do was having my grandma read me bedtime stories. One of the stories she read to me was Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. And I remember there was an extract there, a passcode called Open Sesame. That was literally a password used by Alibaba to enter a cave. So not going to those specifics, but that shows how old the concept of password is on planet Earth. We have advanced so much in the world of technology. We're talking about AIs, getting into the age of AI, yet passwords and authentication is kind of like, Alibaba-ish kind of old. Even in the world of computing, passwords were introduced to the world of computing in 1961 itself, right with the invent of computing. And in fact, the first data breach, if I remember correctly, happened just a couple of years after that. So that's how insecure passwords are on the internet. And from the usability perspective, I believe an average online consumer has about 100 plus online accounts. And imagine having to remember and typing out passwords, especially there are quite a few demographics who find it very difficult to deal with passwords because you kind of like enter those characters, you forget it, you go to the password reset flow. It's a pain for customers and it's a pain for the business as well. If you're a startup, Series A, Series B, Series C funded, you'll likely spend a decent amount of time with your IT and your support cost just because your customers have forgotten passwords. So both from a usability as well as security perspective, we find passwords not that great. And we were looking for a technological breakthrough for the last few years, which will help us remove passwords from Amazon. And one of the way to do that would be passkey. That's how bad password.
I love how you bring up the whole age of computing, because I love to raise the point that like, it's not that passwords were built in today's world. They just were built at a time when it just was fine for what it was then. They're not made for today's society. But yet they've been built into everything that, every modern browser, every computing system. And so it's hard to replace something like that that's sort of ingrained in the internet. And of course, with FIDO, like, we're trying to have that same native support with FIDO and passkeys. And so, like, I love that you brought that up. And the other point that you brought up was just the sheer number of online accounts that folks have these days. I know I went in and counted mine in my password manager, and it was over 200 just for, my own accounts. And so, again, just not fit for purpose for today. So, I really like that you brought up those points. But there have been solutions. I know you just mentioned, with passkeys coming to fruition, but there are solutions that have added layers of security. Of course, we talk about legacy forms of MFA, push notifications, SMS OTPs, things like that. Of course, FIDO security keys, or FIDO2 biometrics, which we call device-bound passkeys, which don't sync across devices, but have been available for some time now. How have you looked at those kinds of solutions in terms of being fit for just large scale consumer deployment like you grapple with at Amazon?
Yeah, glad that you brought it up, Megan. Things like OTPs or your SMS, or um, even the security keys available, those are great initiatives when it comes to security. I'll give some specific examples. So, for example, we use security keys at Amazon internally for our internal security. It works great. It's a great security measure. No one externally can hack into my Amazon internal account using that. That's amazing. Although the challenge with that, when it comes to consumer-facing sign-ins, is that these are difficult to adopt. Now, imagine a 60-year-old mother who is living somewhere in a tier 2 city in India. She won't find it that easy to be able to use a security key, get it to her desktop computer, and click on that security key button. It's just very difficult to use. It's also difficult for enterprises to adopt it. So that's the challenge with these legacy form of FIDO, though they are a great step ahead. As compared to passwords, they add a lot of security benefits, but in terms of usability, they are just not there. That's what we see while deploying it for consumers online. Even if you look at the MFA adoption statistics, I think Twitter released its online. I'll find it difficult to believe that a company will have north of 10% of adoption for such security keys. So that's the challenge with security keys. The usability aspect, not so much on security.
Yeah, I know security keys we call it the gold standard for FIDO. They're totally unphishable. They provide totally unphishable authentication. But whenever, in terms of like a consumer deployment, that's an action, it's a purchase on their part. I mean, there's a lot of steps involved when for us in the authentication space, or for me anyway, I sort of forget that folks are not coming to like Amazon to authenticate. They're coming to buy something usually, right? So they're not as, invested in what that sign in is. And so that like kind of frictionless aspect is really important, right? So I think that so we've learned, folks on the summit today, you've learned about passkeys. Tim and Christian did a fantastic 101 earlier, which shows sort of why we felt the need to introduce passkeys from a capability perspective. So it does overcome some of the hurdles with FIDO and some of the recovery issues by syncing FIDO credentials across devices and operating systems, right? So those credentials are available to you across different devices, which they previously weren't. For Amazon, Amazon, I want to be clear, is a contributor to FIDO, a huge contributor to FIDO, board member to FIDO, has been here since the early days of the FIDO Alliance. But from sort of a journey perspective, how do you feel about the introduction of passkeys, both from your own experiences, but also from the Amazon perspective?
Yeah, sure, Megan. I'm personally pretty excited about passkeys. I think it's a great leap forward from the password and the OTPs and the security keys world. Um, some of the key benefits I can see for passkey is that it really makes it very easy for a customer to use. Uh, they can just do a face ID, like how they used to unlock their phone, or a touch ID, or a fingerprint. And that's how they essentially authenticate in terms of customer experience. So, in terms of friction, like you mentioned, that how customers are on Amazon to shop online, not necessarily authenticate online. Well, that's one of the aspect of it, but overall, it just reduces the burden for customers so much. They don't need to deal with things like recovery, reset your passwords, all that just goes away. Managing 100 different passwords goes away. You just do Face ID. That's how you log into every account available online to you. It's just a very great customer experience. And we have this term at Amazon we use a lot called customer obsession. And this fits perfectly for us in that respect, that this is actually a customer obsessed product where we are making it very easy for the customer to do what they want to do, not just on Amazon, but on any services they use online. And also in terms of security, it uses cryptography in the backend. We have public-private key pair involved there. So it's great both from usability as well as security perspective. Um, and it can be synced to different devices of yours, which is what makes it the most interesting. My fiance, she recently upgraded from iPhone 12 to iPhone 14. I was trying to get her to 13, but that didn't work. So 14 is what it is. But
Why would you
she found it.
do that? Make it the best, the newest.
Yeah. Now, so how in those scenarios, passkeys, if she had passkey available for a company like PayPal or Robinhood, who they have already launched online
Right.
passkeys, she can just use those out of the box. You can just do Face ID. It's like, it's like, it's just a magical experience for her when she's upgrading her phones. Um, so I think yeah, Passkey really raises the bar on customer experience and on security as well, because it's not phishable. You can to me, it just meets the best of the both worlds, and that's what
Right.
makes it more interesting for me and Amazon.
Yeah, I also upgraded to the 14 and I did grapple with moving some things over, like my push notifications. That doesn't move over, and I actually still haven't updated them. I actually switched to security keys for some of those things. But so I'm an adopter of whatever kind of MFA is offered to me because I'm in the business that I'm in, and hopefully it's FIDO. But in the cases that it's not, I'll do the other things. But there's inherent issues with that, right? That you just were bringing up, and if it could just be there by default, then it's just going to increase that the user, them using it, plus for the company, it's going to be great for the security posture. So yeah, I think it's a really, really great new capability. But so Amazon, like I mentioned earlier, both Amazon.com and AWS very involved with the FIDO Alliance since the early days. There's clearly a culture of doing best practices for your customers from an authentication perspective, which is security and usability, right? This has clearly been a priority for Amazon. But one of the questions that I get a lot, or one of the things that we discuss a lot with organizations is how do you build a culture like that within your organization if it's not quite there yet, and maybe not for like the biggest organizations with the biggest amount of users, but really for any organization that's servicing consumers. How would you get started in terms of where do you see the key areas of the business that would be needed to influence a decision to like roll out a passkeys, for example?
Yeah. If you're a PM at a Series A, B, C, D, E funded startup and you're looking at authentication, I'll say one way to build consensus within the company would be to go to different. Passkey has a lot of benefits, and those benefits will attract different stakeholders within the company. For example, the usability benefit will attract a VP of sales, maybe, who's looking to increase their business metrics, their revenue. The security benefit might attack your chief security officer. Apart from these, I believe there's also a lot of SMS cost saving which will come out of passkeys. Not sure, Megan, if you have read that tweet from Elon Musk where he talked about how Twitter has been seeing a huge increase in the SMS cost because buyers are just pumping SMS.
Right.
So there would be some IT department within your organization who would also be grappling with this cost and will be looking at reducing it. So if you're a PM working on authentication, you can have targeted pitches to these different VPs. Use them as your sounding board, use them as your champions within the company to go and really push for passkeys, because passkeys has a lot of benefits. It's not just limited to one particular thing. It's usability, it's security, it's cost savings. There's a lot which comes with passkey. And I'm sure if a PM starts on that path, they will likely see a lot of supporters within the organization, who will root for it and will want to see passkey in the day of light in their particular organizations.
That's great. And we are within the FIDO Alliance just trying to help by just creating assets that can be distributed internally to help reach some of those touch points within the organization, just so it's not such a heavy lift to do that internal buy-in process. So stay tuned for some of that stuff coming from us soon. The other piece of an a deployment of any kind of new authentication system, but aside from, a two-step kind of a system, which is really very opt-in, the use of biometrics on your device. So on the phone is one thing, on the desktop is sort of a new thing for folks. There's some behavioral change that is necessitated with FIDO, and with a billion users, like you said, and globally, some folks are not as savvy as others, or some are not as interested as others in their authentication process. Are there any thoughts that you have on, educating those folks on the benefits of a new sign-in technology, and what kind of touch points do you feel like would reach them the best, or at what point in the transaction journey would it be helpful to address them, enrolling with a new authentication method?
Yeah, glad that you brought this up, Megan. In fact, I've been working on this particular piece itself for the past few months, so I can speak a lot to it. The way a product manager in authentication can think about this would be to segment their customers into various buckets. So for example, you might want to segment your customers into buckets based on their affinity towards a new technological adoption. You will see there's a bucket of innovators, of early adopters, of early majority, of a late majority, of laggards, skeptics who will never want to adopt a new technology. And you can have different targeted approach for all these customer segments. For example, innovators like people like Megan and me, they will want to try new technology. Like I get very excited when Steve Jobs used to go and he launched Apple's iPod. I was the first one to go and get an iPod for me. So there would be those category of innovators whom you would want to start with. Show me the benefits of passkey on your customer journey. I'll be very into adopt it. And those would be your early innovators. Usually industry standard says that about 2 to 3% of your customer base would be your early innovators. The next would be early majority. They usually go about 15 to 20%. That's the industry standard. Then as these early adopters start adopting your technology, with word of mouth, they'll start attracting the early majority as well, which will get you to about 50% maybe. Then with FIDO pushing this, with all the internet companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, they all will have more internet companies adopt into passkeys. We will see that chasm being crossed, and your lead majority customers and your skeptic customers who don't want to adopt new technology will eventually come. Now, this won't happen overnight. It'll take about a few years for this technological adoption curve to go, but we are at that inflection point of that adoption life cycle, and we strongly believe that adoption curve can be met. But that's where we start today, targeting our early adopters and our innovators to use passkeys.
That's a really good point, because basically, I mean, it sounded like what you said is once you get over that 50% hurdle, some of the other adopters will kind of push you over, right? Because folks are now used to that. And then it's by sort of attrition that, everybody kind of comes together. I always say that, or I guess, or I surmise, or I predict that once somebody has done it at an Amazon.com or a PayPal, for example, the next time that pops up, they say, okay, that's what I did there. So it's the same thing. Great. And that's what I hope will happen. And we've seen that happen with other kind of new technologies being introduced out to the market. But I think that's a really great point that you raised, that it's actually going to be kind of a community effort. I mean, a company like Amazon will do obviously a lot to, get their customers on board, but it's sort of an industry effort for folks to kind of get on board, adopt, and then educate consumers, consistently and together. So that's a really great point. So this has been a really great chat. I guess the only other thing I would ask is just kind of an open-ended question, which is there anything else you would want to tell a service provider, whether they're large or small, that's really dealing with consumer facing sign-ins? They're grappling with passwords, maybe grappling with getting opt-ins for legacy MFA. They're looking for something to solve that problem. Is there anything that you would want to tell them?
Yeah, I'll definitely encourage them to look into passkeys, because I personally believe it will become an industry standard in the next 10 years. Your customers will start expecting your individual company to give them support for passkey, because that's what they're using in other companies, and that's what they expect out of every other internet company. So I would definitely encourage that PM or that person to actually go and look into passkeys. It's not perfect by any order. There are still changes in it, but it's a big step forward as compared to passwords, which your customers will love, your management will love, and it's the right way forward for getting rid of the age-old passwords.
I think that's
Hopefully,
a perfect message.
hopefully when your grandkids are reading messages, reading bedtime stories, they won't deal with an open sesame kind of a story. They'll rather go with a Face ID.
I think that's a great kind of closing message to our audience. Yash, thank you so much for this chat. It's been great chatting with you and getting to know you better, and really hearing about your perspectives on this from such a large consumer-facing organization has been really, really great. So thank you so much. And if folks want to ask any questions or get in touch with me, please shoot me a note. Happy to chat further. So next up, we have Andrew Shikiar, our Executive Director and CMO, who's going to be talking to Susan Koski, who is the CISO at PNC Bank, about their enrollment and deployment with FIDO and their experiences with their deployment. So please stay tuned.